Chance, from acid rap to now, his content it's different. Fans have noticed that. Chance rapped the ABCs in a verse recently. That's what I mean. I want you to be aware of your business, know whether you're in a 360 or not. I want you to appreciate the culture that changed your life and took you from college dorm rooms eating oodles and noodles.
Chill.
Yeah. Kendrick, you can fool them, can't fool me, dog.
Yo, what are y'all talking about? These ain't like us.
Before the showdown even started between the tiny Tupac twin and Sandra's suing son, the one spraying lyrical bullets like a wild western gunslinger, there was another voice echoing from the sidelines. That voice? None other than Joe Budden, the man who saw the future of rap long before the rest even caught on. Joe wasn't just another artist chasing streams. He was a visionary watching the entire industry shift beneath his feet, calling every move before it even happened. Joe studied the rap game like a scientist studies atoms, breaking down trends, studying patterns, and predicting which artists would rise and fall. These days, being a rapper and a content creator are practically the same thing. You've got guys like Blackboy Max or DDG, who don't just drop tracks. They stream, vlog, and build entire empires off their personalities. Their income isn't just coming from the mic anymore. It's from the content that feeds off their music and keeps their names buzzing. Then you've got the old-school legends reinventing themselves through content. Take 6ix9ine, T Grizzly, and even T-Pain. These dudes didn't fade out. They flipped the game. They used streaming and content creation to spark brand new audiences who might have never pressed play on their old songs. They built digital kingdoms out of consistency and charisma. And at the top tier, you've got rappers carving their exit plans through podcasts and shows, turning their names into media brands. Look at Nicki Minaj with Queen Radio. Sure, Barbs, she's far from retirement, but she didn't just grab a mic to rap. She grabbed one to dominate conversations. And you can't forget NORE with Drink Champs, or even Fat Joe and Jadakiss. Their podcast episodes in 2025 pull numbers some rappers would kill for in music streams. But when you think of rapper turned content creator, one name stands alone: Joe Budden. His name is the blueprint. The man built the Joe Budden network from scratch, and it's now a full-blown media empire. From sponsorships to ad deals, licensing, merch, and Patreon exclusives, Joe's raking in over $1 million a month, just from talking his talk. But don't get it twisted, this success didn't come easy. Joe's climb to the top was filled with bad contracts, shady business deals, and constant disrespect. For years, people tried to clown him, labeling him a bitter retired rapper who couldn't handle the new wave. They had no idea he was crafting an entirely new lane that would change the culture forever. Joe Budden became the standard, proving that a rapper can evolve into a respected media mogul and still make serious money doing it. But things weren't always this bright. Back in 2016, Joe faced a tough realization. His best rap days were behind him. Instead of forcing another album, he made a bold move most rappers only talk about. He retired. That decision marked the start of his transformation and the beginning of one of hip-hop's biggest rebrands ever. And before Joe ever started predicting today's media landscape, he had another vision. One that could have reshaped the entire hip-hop world if he hadn't chosen to break free and bet on himself. But we'll get into that later, because right now, we're talking about Everyday Struggle, the show that flipped hip-hop media upside down. The whole concept was genius. One veteran rapper who's seen it all, done it all, and knows every dark secret of the industry, going head-to-head with a loud, controversial internet personality from a completely different generation. Old-school wisdom versus modern chaos, and that combo? Explosive! And that internet personality was none other than Big Mac. Academics. The energy between Joe Budden and Ack was pure electricity. A mix of comedy, tension, and unfiltered truth. The internet had never seen anything like it. Two men on opposite sides of the hip-hop spectrum, different eras, styles, tastes, even down to their choice in food, clashing on camera over every trending topic in rap. Before the show even began, Joe gave fans a glimpse of his vision for what it would be. He said, "Rap Twitter deals with things on a surface level. We're gonna peel the layers back. Ack's gonna give me every thought from a consumer perspective, and I'm gonna crap on all of it because I hate consumers." And that's exactly what he did. Joe Budden brought the smoke every single episode. If you go back and watch those classic Everyday Struggle clips, you'll see how many of his takes aged like fine wine. He didn't just argue from emotion, he argued from experience. He'd lived through label drama, industry politics, and betrayal, and that gave him a lens no fan could replicate. Joe wasn't speaking from the outside looking in. He was speaking from the inside looking out. One of their most iconic debates came during the 10-year anniversary discussion of the legendary sales battle between Kanye West and 50 Cent.
Those 3 Big Macs are for me. Them 2 big ass fries for me.
Academics said that when Kanye outsold 50, it was like a passing of the torch moment. 50 was running the streets with his tough, money-getting image, while Kanye came through with that introspective, emotional energy that shifted hip-hop toward artists like Drake, Kid Cudi, and J. Cole. It was the beginning of a new era, a softer, more expressive side of rap taking over the charts. But Joe saw it differently. To him, it wasn't just about 2 rappers going head-to-head. It was about what hip-hop was becoming. It was the cultural shift from raw street dominance to emotional vulnerability, from hustlers to thinkers. And Joe, once again, saw it before anyone else did. And the consumers were picking who they thought was the top dog.
Not reporting on the street will escalate to a point where you're not going to report on it. And you can't report on it. What else?
But behind the curtain, there was something way bigger going on. Joe Budden claimed this wasn't just a friendly competition. It was a calculated move by the record label that owned both artists, Universal Music Group. Ring a bell? Joe said UMG was done dealing with 50 Cent's wild behavior. The disses, the arrogance, the control. He was too powerful, too unpredictable. So, they allegedly staged this head-to-head just to push Kanye West forward.
Every 4 or 5 years in music, the sound changed. This is Universal saying we have had enough of 50 Cent and his arrogance. We have had enough of this dominant man just kind of doing whatever he wanted to do, as it had to do with Universal / Interscope. Now, Def Jam, Kanye West, they are Universal. 50, Interscope, they are Universal.
Because he was the one they could manage, shape, and promote exactly how they wanted. Sounds wild now, but in 2007, Kanye was the industry's golden child. And that right there exposed something Joe had been preaching for years. How record labels manipulate trends and crown new kings when it benefits them. To fans, it looks like a natural shift in culture. But in reality, these moments are often strategic, engineered, and meticulously planned behind the scenes. Fast forward to today, and we saw nearly the same formula play out again. This time with Drake and Kendrick Lamar. Just like 50 and Kanye, both were signed under UMG but through different branches. Kanye was under Def Jam, UMG, and 50 was under Interscope, also UMG. Now, Kendrick's on Interscope too, while Drake's signed to Republic. Again, both under UMG's massive umbrella. Joe Budden broke this down years before anyone else. He said these so-called rap wars aren't always as organic as they seem. And Drake's lawsuit against UMG? That's what connected it all. He allegedly believed that as he approached contract renegotiations, after finishing a $400 million deal.
Why would Universal make this humongous rollout marketing plan for 2 of their own artists, pitting them against one another, solely because of 50?
The label turned its machine against him, pushing all the weight behind Kendrick to make him look like the chosen one. In both battles, Kanye vs. 50 and Drake vs. Kendrick, the underdog came out on top. And conveniently, both were artists UMG wanted to elevate. And sure, fans could say Kanye's Graduation outclassed 50's Curtis, or Kendrick's Not Like Us hit harder than any Drake diss.
When Kanye won this matchup, it allotted for people like you to feel exactly like you just said you felt. Kanye was making great music. This is when he made the jump. And from the jump, he never looked back. And from the jump, 50 wasn't able to progress in music.
But Joe argued that's exactly how labels keep control. They make manipulation look like momentum. And Joe had been saying this for over 8 years, long before the internet caught up. Then came the infamous Everyday Struggle meltdown with Lil Yachty, when Joe completely lost it. Yachty was one of the hottest new stars, fresh off multi-million-dollar brand deals with massive companies, and ready to drop his debut album. But Joe wasn't hating, he was worried. He pressed Yachty on whether he even knew the details of his contract, asking if he was in a 360 deal. When Yachty said he didn't know, Joe exploded. That outburst wasn't just rage. It was fear from someone who had already lived that nightmare, watching another young artist walk right into it without realizing the trap ahead. That debut album didn't perform nearly as well as expected, selling only around 40,000 copies in its first week, which was underwhelming for an artist with Yachty's hype. And if his business wasn't set up right, like Joe Budden had warned, that flop could have trapped him in a brutal deal.
Tell me what you want from hip hop.
I don't know.
You don't think that's a question you should answer at some point?
Making music, bro. I'm just having fun.
You're gonna have a big problem with just asking.
Yeah,
you
what do
don't
you
sound
want
like
to
you
see?
very aware with what's going on, and you one of the hottest on earth. I want you to be aware of your business, know whether you're in a 360 or not. I want you to appreciate the culture that changed your life and took you from college dorm rooms eating oodles and noodles.
Chill. Yeah.
One where he'd owe the label for years just trying to pay back his advance. Joe wasn't trying to embarrass him. He was trying to save him from the same pain he'd already lived through. Budden knew that story too well. Back in his prime, he came in hot with Pump It Up, a massive debut single that had the whole industry watching. But when he couldn't top that momentum, his label turned cold fast. Contracts, broken promises, creative control. He saw it all go downhill. Joe wasn't speaking from a fan's point of view. He was talking as someone who had been burned, trapped, and tossed aside by the same system. But Joe's genius wasn't just in calling out shady business deals. He was also predicting the social side of hip-hop's future. During Everyday Struggle, Academics had become the voice of the new SoundCloud era. The rappers living online 24/7, from Lil Pump to XXXTentacion. He streamed with them, promoted them, and hyped their controversies. But Joe saw danger coming. In one infamous episode, Joe and Ak were reviewing a clip of XXXTentacion getting into it with the Migos. Joe snapped, not because of the fight, but because of how Academics was handling it. Joe warned that hyping up these conflicts online without offering real guidance or protection was dangerous. He told Ak straight up that by glorifying these feuds for views, he was fanning the flames, and that those same flames could burn everyone involved. Then Joe sent out a chilling warning to XXXTentacion himself, saying that if he kept running to the internet after every altercation instead of moving, smart and staying protected, it could end in tragedy. Sadly, Joe's words became hauntingly true just a year later. XXXTentacion was gone, caught in the same kind of unguarded situation Joe had warned about. It was like watching prophecy turn to pain. And that wasn't the only time Joe's words aged like prophecy. He predicted a ton of things throughout his Everyday Struggle run, from forcing Academics to do 100 push-ups after losing a bet that Kendrick's Damn would sell over 500,000 copies in its first week, to calling out Chance the rapper's slow fall from grace. Joe had warned that Chance's clean, overly cheerful image, what he called those extra soft, Charmin Sesame Street type raps, would alienate fans who once loved him for his raw emotion on acid rap. He said Chance was drifting too far from what made him special, chasing positivity and branding over vulnerability and truth. And when the public eventually turned on Chance, Joe's words hit like a lightning strike. Everything he said about labels, about artists, about authenticity came true. Joe Budden wasn't just debating hip-hop. He was predicting its entire future while the world laughed, streamed, and argued.
Because in my plan, either everybody going to get paid or you going to get paid. And that's what happened when I left. They have all the rights to these shows. And that's where Joe's business relationship always gets a little bumpy. Because I come in and I'm a success. And then you see how much of a success it is. And then you want the rights to other things. And Joe says no every time.
Proving again that sometimes the loudest man in the room is also the one telling the truth. About 2 years later, Chance the Rapper dropped his long-awaited debut album, The Big Day. And it was a disaster. What was meant to be his crowning moment turned into one of the biggest flops in modern hip-hop history. Fans roasted the project online, calling it overly corny and obsessed with how much he loved his wife. It became a meme, not a milestone. And everything critics said echoed exactly what Joe Budden had warned about years earlier. Joe had predicted that if Chance kept heading down that polished, overly cheerful path, fans would turn on him. And that's exactly what happened. Back when Chance was at his peak, Joe was one of the few voices brave enough to point out that something felt off. 2 years later, every criticism Joe made came true, word for word. But here's the wild part. Despite all the backlash and the hater label he earned, Everyday Struggle became one of the most successful hip-hop talk shows ever created. It launched Academics into superstardom and solidified Joe Budden as the face of a brand new lane, the rapper turned media giant. His bold takes and raw honesty changed how rap media operated forever. So you'd think Joe would ride that wave, right? Keep the show going, keep stacking checks, and let the success snowball. But no, Joe Budden did what only Joe Budden would do. Just 8 months after Everyday Struggle took off, he walked away. Out of nowhere, he quit. Fans were stunned. This man had finally found massive success outside of music, and he dropped it like nothing. It was the equivalent of Lil Wayne quitting after Thought Carter 3. Or Kanye retiring right after beating 50 Cent in that sales war. completely unthinkable. But Joe had a reason. Years later, in an interview with Academics, he broke down exactly why he left. He said, "Do us right. I'm not yelling for Complex to eat off my back while we get scraps. I've been homeless before. I'll be fine. I'm fighting for us to be treated fairly." He explained that while the show was pulling in huge numbers, the people making it, him, Nadeska, the production crew, weren't being paid what they deserved. Joe revealed he was earning about $22,000 a month, sometimes $19K after paying his team. When it came time for renegotiation, he asked for $50,000 a month, knowing the show's value had skyrocketed. Complex countered with $40K, 10,000 less, and that's all it took for Joe to walk away. To him, that missing 10K wasn't about money. It was about respect. It showed Complex saw him as an employee, not a creator who helped build their biggest show. So Joe left, even at the peak of success, to rebuild everything from the ground up. He wanted full control. No middlemen, no limits, no exploitation. That single move changed everything. Joe's decision to walk away from everyday struggle and go fully independent ended up shaping the future of both him and Academics. They each went on to build their own media empires, proving that independence wasn't just a dream. It was the smartest play in the long run. That might have sounded like a lot of money for Complex to shell out back then. But look at where things stand in 2025. Joe Budden's podcast is earning over $1 million a month just from Patreon alone. Imagine if Everyday Struggle had continued with that same energy, chemistry, and cultural pull. The numbers would have been astronomical. Complex had the golden ticket in their hands, but they fumbled it because they wouldn't bump Joe's check by a mere 10 grand.
Those 3 Big Macs are for me.
Joe was asking for $50,000 a month, and they refused. Fast forward, and his independent podcast now pulls in 10 times that, easily clearing between $300,000 to $500,000 monthly, even after expenses. By refusing to compromise and standing on ownership, Joe transformed himself from a host earning $19,000 a month at Complex into a full-blown mogul banking life-changing money on his own terms. And the numbers don't lie. The Joe Budden Podcast YouTube channel racks up around 10 million views a month, which translates to roughly $100,000 in ad revenue, just from YouTube alone. Add that to sponsorships, brand deals, and Patreon income, and you start realizing how massive his empire has become. Complex could have easily been part of that success if they just valued him properly back then. That $50K request looks laughably small compared to what he's pulling in now. When Joe walked away from Everyday Struggle, it wasn't just about pride, it was about power. Leaving that show gave him the freedom to pour everything into the Joe Budden Podcast with Rory and Mal.
Drake, he's gone ahead and filed a lawsuit for Kendrick Lamar's Not Like Us.
By 2018, that decision paid off big time. The show exploded, becoming one of the biggest podcasts in hip-hop culture, and landing an exclusive deal with Spotify reportedly worth under $2 million a year. On paper, that sounded amazing. Joe went from asking Complex for 50 grand a month to making roughly $180,000 monthly under Spotify. But here's the catch.
Kendrick and Drake make us wait till 2030 to get whatever the they about to do.
Like y'all avoid each other because y'all operate in different spaces, but y'all keep bumping into each other artistically because y'all are that great. You cannot do it.
He didn't own a piece of the platform, had no ad revenue share, and no equity. Spotify controlled distribution, monetization, and branding. Joe just got the check. A big one, sure, but still just a check. For someone who fought his entire career for independence. That didn't sit right. So by 2020, Joe walked away again, cutting ties with Spotify and accusing them of treating his show like a disposable asset. He claimed they didn't care about his podcast, only about what having it on their platform did for Spotify's growth. He called them out publicly, saying they refused to pay fair bonuses or give ownership stakes to the people who built the show from the ground up. In Joe's own words, Spotify was pimping the pod. They loved the traffic, the subscribers, the headlines, but not the creators behind it. They wanted the brand, not the people. So, once again, Joe Budden bet on himself, walked away from corporate control, and rebuilt everything independently. This time, keeping every dime, every view, and every decision in his hands. Spotify didn't care about the Joe Budden podcast itself. They cared about what the traffic from Joe's audience could do for Spotify as a whole. They paid to have his show exclusively on their platform so that all those listeners would stick around and explore other podcasts already hosted there. Joe said it plainly. Spotify wasn't prioritizing his growth or creativity. They were prioritizing their own numbers. After endless negotiations, they refused to give any fair bonus structures to his co-hosts. and still wouldn't offer ownership. Joe saw the writing on the wall and walked away once again. To outsiders, it might have looked like he was the problem, the guy who couldn't keep a deal. But in reality, Joe was ahead of the curve. Every time he left a corporate setup, it was because he predicted he'd make more and keep more by going independent. And he was right. Fast forward to today, Joe Budden has over 70,000 paying Patreon subscribers, making his Joe Budden Network one of the highest-earning creator-owned podcasts in the world. The network reportedly pulls in over $1 million a month just from Patreon alone. His independence didn't just pay off. It inspired a wave of other creators to follow suit. Even academics, the same man who once sat across from Joe on Everyday Struggle, ended up taking a page from Joe's playbook. He had his own deal with Spotify too, but eventually pivoted back to his independent grind, focusing on his live streams, YouTube, Twitch, and Instagram platforms. Independence wasn't just a move anymore. It became the model.
Kendrick, you can fool them, can't fool me, dog. Been in this game for years. You can't trick me, you such a student, dog.
And when you zoom out and look at the biggest names in podcasting, Joe's philosophy echoes everywhere. Take Joe Rogan, once Spotify's crown jewel, with his Joe Rogan Experience becoming exclusive to the platform in 2020. But when his contract was renewed in early 2024, reportedly worth around $250 million, Spotify dropped the exclusivity clause. Now Rogan's back on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere else. That freedom means more revenue, more reach, and more control. Exactly what Joe Budden had warned about years earlier. Joe's message was clear. Locking creators to one platform limits growth. It traps them under a corporate system that profits from their audience without empowering them to own it. And just like he predicted, that exclusivity model collapsed industry-wide.
It's a stone cold killer on the loose that been quiet for years. Kendrick could play all this coy shit he want. He is an animal, threat to society.
By 2021, other major podcasts like Last Podcast on the left Spotify's exclusive program, publicly stating that the model was hurting their growth and killing their numbers. Reports later showed that some shows lost more than 3/4 of their audience when they became Spotify only. Those numbers were brutal, and they proved Joe right once again. So Spotify changed course. They moved away from exclusivity deals, realizing that while short-term control brought in subscribers, it crippled long-term success. Podcasts thrive on accessibility, and Joe had been shouting that from the rooftops years before anyone listened. In essence, Spotify learned the hard way what Joe Budden already knew. Ownership and freedom always win in the long run. By keeping his vision independent, Joe not only secured his bag, but also helped redefine how the entire podcast industry operates today. Spotify's exclusivity plan was doomed from the start, and Joe Budden called it years before it collapsed. He warned that limiting podcasts to one platform would shrink their audiences, weaken their influence, and eventually backfire on Spotify itself. And that's exactly what happened. By keeping creators locked in, Spotify ended up choking the very growth that made those shows valuable in the first place. Joe's early criticisms of Spotify's ownership-first mindset perfectly foreshadowed the downfall of the exclusivity model across the podcast industry. So, we've seen Joe go after artists, record labels, and corporations. But there was one entity that sparked one of his boldest moments ever. Not just an artist, an entire force in music. That entity? Drake. When Joe launched his podcast, it didn't even have an official name yet. He jokingly called it, "I'll name this podcast later."
I still don't see this head-to-head Armageddon that you keep trying to predict, you keep trying to will to happen.
This is happening. Armageddon is here.
And right from those early days, Joe lit up the internet with one of the most talked about critiques of Drake's entire career. His breakdown of views. Back in 2016, Drake was fresh off his Meek Mill feud. His back-to-back diss had cemented him as the winner in public opinion. But Joe saw the cracks forming. Sure, Drake's crown was intact. But the world had learned something that couldn't be unseen. Drake didn't write all his own raps. That revelation left a stain on his image. A chink in his armor that Joe Budden couldn't ignore.
Y'all are never getting what you were talking about, that face-off. It's never happening.
And Joe says only one person gotta get mad for this to happen.
Now, this gets deep, because Joe's critique of views wasn't just about the music. It was about where Drake was heading. Joe saw a superstar losing hunger, losing focus, and trading lyrical depth for pop perfection. And at the time, that was a risky thing to say. The world loved Drake, but Joe was already predicting the burnout that would follow. And to truly understand Joe's point, you gotta remember the background of that Meek Mill beef. Around that same time, Drake was subtly taking shots at Jay-Z throughout their tension. On Charged Up, he rapped, "I got me a deal with Apple, I still feel entitled," referencing Jay-Z's streaming platform Tidal, which Drake famously turned down to sign with Apple Music instead. That Apple deal led to one of the biggest moves in streaming history. Drake dropped Views as the first ever Apple Music exclusive album, and that's the exact project Joe Budden tore apart on his podcast. Drake didn't stop there. He fired again on 30 for 30 freestyle, saying, "Not really sure what more you expected," when the higher-ups all come together as a collective, hinting that industry giants were plotting to end his run. Years later, Drake doubled down in an interview, saying the infamous Quentin Miller reference tracks weren't leaked by Meek Mill directly, but by a higher-up who pressured DJ Drama into handing them over. Drake claimed that this mystery figure told Drama something like, "Our guy Meek isn't looking too good right now. We need those reference tracks." The idea was to leak them alongside Meek's diss track Wanna Know to swing the war in Meek's favor. According to Drake, that's how the ghostwriting scandal erupted, a setup orchestrated by powerful figures behind the scenes. So when Joe Budden tore into Views, he wasn't just talking about production or lyrics. He was dissecting the machine behind Drake. He saw the politics, the fatigue, the shift in authenticity, and he said it all before anyone dared to admit Drake might be slipping. That's when DJ Drama allegedly handed over the reference tracks, under pressure from what Drake described as a mysterious higher-up. And who could that be? Many pointed to Jay-Z, since Meek Mill was signed under his Roc Nation management at the time. While the Drake-Meek beef raged, Drake dropped his disses and subtly threw shade, referencing how he still had love for his idols, but wasn't afraid to walk his own path. When he rapped, "I got me a deal with Apple. I still feel entitled," it was a slick jab at Jay-Z's Tidal. The streaming platform Drake turned down to side with Apple Music. Jay-Z, managing Meek Mill, now stood opposite Drake in more ways than one. Years later, Drake would again allude to this so-called higher-up, who allegedly convinced DJ Drama to leak the Quentin Miller reference tracks, tipping the scales in Meek's favor. Drake claimed powerful industry. Figures wanted to end his run and send a message. It wasn't just a rap beef, it was a power struggle between giants controlling the future of streaming and music influence itself. When Views dropped, it was supposed to feature Jay-Z and Kanye West together on Pop Style. But when the final album arrived, Jay's verse was gone. Joe Budden noticed immediately and tied it to a bigger story unfolding behind the scenes. During his explosive Views critique, Joe suggested there was a silent war happening, a shift in power between Drake and Jay-Z over the future of music ownership and streaming. Dominance. Joe couldn't prove it yet. Not back then. But he felt it. The tension was real. And months later, Kanye himself confirmed parts of it during a Life of Pablo tour stop, claiming Jay-Z pulled both his and his own verse from Pop Style because of bad blood between Tidal, Apple Music, and Meek Mill's circle. That revelation fit perfectly into the puzzle Joe had already been piecing together. That higher up conspiracy Drake hinted at was likely real all along. And that brings us back to Views. Joe's rant about that album wasn't just about Drake sounding tired. It was about him sounding defeated. Joe said Drake seemed like a man at war with the industry and losing the passion that once made him great. Looking back, that take feels prophetic. For many fans, myself included, Views was the breaking point. Before that, Drake's catalog felt inspired, layered, and full of heart. Albums like If You're Reading This, It's Too Late had grit and introspection, even if ghostwriters were involved. But Views marked a change. It felt safer, glossier, and built for charts, not legacy. Joe Budden called it out instantly, saying Drake had traded artistry for algorithm, passion for profit. From that point forward, Drake leaned heavier into his pop star lane, flooding the market with repetitive hits that made millions but lost the emotional punch of his early work. Joe didn't just critique an album, he pinpointed the exact moment Drake stopped chasing greatness and started chasing numbers. And over time, that observation proved right again and again. And what was it all really for? Just to rack up those dreamy streaming numbers. The longer the albums, the fatter the track lists, the more formulaic the songs, the higher the payout. But at what cost? Not money, not fame. It was Drake's legacy. Joe Budden saw it early. Drake's obsession with dominating the charts came at the expense of innovation. While his producer 40 kept evolving sonically, Drake began regressing lyrically, recycling the same flows, same moods, and same safe formulas that guaranteed millions of streams but little soul. Joe said it bluntly, Drake went from setting the wave to chasing it. At that time, Joe's rants were raw, scattered, and full of passion, long before he became the sharp, calculated podcaster we know today. But even through the chaos, his words rang true. He kept asking the real question. What did we learn from Drake? From Take Care to Views, what new truth did he reveal? Joe's answer was brutal. Nothing. Drake was supposed to be the voice of introspection, the man who carried the emotional torch Jay-Z once held. That rare mix of vulnerability and dominance. But instead of pushing culture forward, Joe said Drake watered himself down for mass appeal. The introspective genius became a pop machine, spitting out glossy hits with little depth, all to please the suits behind him. Joe hinted that this wasn't fully Drake's choice either, that corporate strings were pulling tight. There was a silent tug-of-war behind the scenes between music giants and streaming powers, and Drake was caught in the middle. Once he signed that Apple Music deal, everything changed. Suddenly, every year came with a new Drake album, 20-plus tracks, predictable hooks, and algorithm-friendly vibes. The art took a backseat to analytics. Each project got longer, safer, and more mechanical. Perfect for streaming loops, but empty in emotion. And as Joe predicted, Drake became less of a cultural leader and more of a commercial engine. Ironically, Views, the album Joe ripped apart, aged better over time, but his critique hit harder than ever in hindsight. Joe had wanted Drake to rise into that Jay-Z of the new era role, a visionary voice guiding the next generation. But instead, Drake drifted toward what Joe called a manufactured pop star.
I did do this Like That remix though. I think that's what you was wanting to lead into.
Shit.
Let me see.
The energy, the storytelling, the risk, all gone. Joe even dropped a series of diss tracks afterward, unpacking everything he'd warned about, that Drake had lost touch with the hunger that built him. He questioned why Drake was so quick to crush rappers like Meek Mill, yet constantly leaned on Future's sound, slang, and energy. It was like watching someone trade originality for relevance. Drake, once the tastemaker, became the trend follower.
I need for Kanye to move out of the way.
It's Kendrick Drake. Kanye move. Justin LeBoy move. You guys have to stop.
And Joe saw it coming 10 years before anyone dared to say it out loud. And when you fast forward to the present, Joe's predictions echo louder than ever. Drake's recent collabs, his chase for viral moments, even his back and forths with Kendrick Lamar, they all trace back to that same artistic identity crisis Joe called out in 2016. Joe didn't just critique Views, he exposed the start of a creative decline that would reshape Drake's legacy for an entire generation. Because in the end, Joe wasn't just asking about Drake's music.
Drake is bringing legal action against Universal Music Group as a result of Lamar's track Not Like Us, alleging they artificially inflated the popularity of Lamar's track. That is so culturally clueless.
He was questioning what kind of blueprint Drake was leaving behind. If the biggest artist in the world stops pushing boundaries, what message does that send to the next wave of rappers coming up behind him? That's the legacy Joe Budden was fighting for, the soul of hip-hop itself. Joe always pointed to Jay-Z as the model of what an artist should be at the top, someone who, despite fame and pressure, never compromised the integrity of his art. With Drake, Joe argued the opposite happened. From one project to the next, the music became more diluted, more algorithmic, and less inspired. And if you look around today, you can hear it in the new generation too. Artists who sound more like Drake's leftovers than Drake's legacy. That Views partnership with Apple Music.
Cole, I don't think is just prepared for these lights to be this bright.
They're not
These
battle
lights
tested.
are too.
I'm not checking.
Right.
That's where Joe said it all started to shift. Drake became the frontliner for the new streaming era, the face of a system that rewarded quantity over creativity. Joe warned that the rise of streaming platforms would reshape music entirely, pushing artists to prioritize virality over artistry. Instead of lyricism, we got quick TikTok hooks. Instead of storytelling, we got catchy sound bites. Instead of tight albums, we got bloated playlists disguised as projects.
You can't trick me. You such a student, dog.
Yo, what are y'all talking about? These niggas ain't like us.
Back in 2016, Joe Budden looked Drake in the eye, metaphorically through the mic, and said, "You have the torch now. Everything you once rapped about wanting, you've got it. So what are you gonna do with that voice?" That line aged like prophecy. Drake was no longer chasing the crown. He had it, but what he did with it, Joe said, was squander it for stats. And of course, Drake didn't stay silent. He fired a subtle shot back on No Shopping with French Montana, rapping, "Pump it up. I'm not a one-hit wonder. They know all my stuff." A slick jab at Joe's past, sure, but also deeply ironic. Joe wasn't saying Drake was worse than him. He was saying Drake was better, infinitely better, but was wasting that greatness chasing easy hits. Drake's diss only proved Joe's point. He was too defensive to see the truth in the critique. What came next was pure chaos. Joe Budden dropped 4 vicious diss tracks back to back, dismantling Drake piece by piece. His authenticity, his ambition, his character. And crazy enough, a lot of the same questions Joe raised in those songs would later echo through Pusha T's and Kendrick Lamar's own battles with Drake years later. Joe didn't just diss Drake, he wrote the manual on how to attack him. He laid out the exact blueprint that future rivals would follow to expose Drake's contradictions. Everything from the ghostwriting controversies to the inflated image. Joe touched it first. He dissected the superstar layer by layer until there was nothing left but the man beneath the image. And here's the wildest part. One of Joe's early critiques practically predicted Kendrick's now iconic, "Let your core audience stomach that, then tell them where you get your abs from" bar. That was Joe's message years earlier, calling out how Drake's carefully curated image was outpacing his authenticity. Kendrick just said it with sharper teeth. What inspired me to dive deep into this whole timeline was actually a video by one of my favorite creators right now, Geek About It. His breakdown on how Joe Budden predicted Not Like Us and the entire Drake versus Kendrick beef made me realize something huge. Joe wasn't ranting out of hate, he was forecasting the culture. Joe Budden didn't just talk about trends, he saw them forming years before anyone else did. And when you trace it all back, from his views critique to his disses to his Spotify fallout, it's clear. Joe didn't just predict hip-hop's future, he defined it before it even happened. I want to take a second and really look at what Joe Budden had to say, because this man practically saw the future. Like some kind of hip-hop Nostradamus, Joe predicted events in rap years before they even happened. And the most chilling example of that foresight came during the Drake versus Kendrick Lamar war. Long before the internet was buzzing with Not Like Us memes, Joe Budden had already called it. Nearly 3 years before the first shots were ever fired, Joe was on record saying this clash was inevitable. He warned that 2 giants sitting comfortably at the top could never peacefully coexist for long. And the way he described how it would play out, how Drake would ultimately fall, sounded outrageous back then. But fast forward to now, and it's like he read the script word for word. Joe said Kendrick still had that primal, competitive spirit, that fire real MCs never lose. While everyone else thought Kendrick was too quiet, too removed, Joe saw through the silence. He knew Kendrick wasn't done. He was waiting. He called Drake a student of strategy, but warned that Kendrick was the real tactician, the one who'd been studying the game from the shadows. So when First Person Shooter dropped, and Drake confidently claimed his spot among the big 3, Joe immediately said, "Watch Kendrick. He's not gonna let that slide." And sure enough, Kendrick didn't. Just like Joe predicted, Kendrick struck back, igniting one of the most explosive lyrical wars in modern rap. The crazy part? Joe had been dropping these hints for years. He told his listeners repeatedly, "Don't take your eyes off Kendrick." He said the game may look peaceful, but tension was always simmering beneath the surface, even when hip-hop seemed more about charts than competition, with Drake and J. Cole hugging it out on stage, and Kendrick laying low building his PG Lang label and mentoring Baby Keem. Joe said the fire was still there. When Family Ties dropped and Kendrick declared, "I'm smoking on your top 5 tonight," Joe instantly recognized it as a warning shot to Drake. He said Kendrick wasn't just flexing, he was positioning himself. Every move, every verse, every line was a slow burn leading toward a long-awaited showdown. Then came First Person Shooter, where Drake and Cole tried to frame themselves as part of an untouchable big 3. Joe Budden said right then that Kendrick was watching that in disgust and that the moment would light the fuse for something major. And what happened next? Kendrick dropped Like That and set the entire culture on fire, saying, "F the big 3, it's just Big Me." And here's the wildest twist, before Rapaholics even existed, about a month before Kendrick dropped that verse. I was rewatching an old Joe Budden podcast episode and noticed a comment where someone wrote almost word for word what would end up happening. I don't know what made me take a screenshot of it, but now looking back, it's eerie. Like Joe and his audience both felt that moment coming before the world did. Joe Budden's ability to sense cultural shifts before they explode isn't luck. It's pattern recognition at the highest level. He studies energy, ego, and timing the way producers study beats. When he said Drake and Kendrick were destined to clash, people laughed it off. Now, it's one of the most defining rivalries of the decade, just like Joe said it would be. The date on that screenshot says it all. February 28th, 2024. That's a full month before Kendrick Lamar dropped his bombshell line. F the big three. It's just big me. And right there, a random commenter named Censure120 wrote, Kendrick is chilling. J. Cole is amazing. But there's levels to this. Nobody wants Kendrick Lamar to act up again. Enjoy the peace. Like, what? How could someone have felt that energy brewing unless Joe Budden had already been stirring the pot on his podcast, hinting that Kendrick was about to wake up the monster inside him? It's wild. Because Joe must have been talking about the tension Kendrick felt after watching Drake and J. Cole share that first-person shooter moment. The hugs, the smiles, the fake unity. Joe saw through it all. He said that kind of display would definitely bother Kendrick, who's always been fueled by competition, not camaraderie. So it makes perfect sense that this random comment, written weeks before the storm hit, was born out of Joe's earlier conversations about Kendrick, being too quiet and ready to remind the world who really runs hip-hop. And sure enough, not even a month later, the entire game exploded. Like That hit #1, and hip-hop descended into full-on chaos. Suddenly, everyone wanted a piece of the action. Rick Ross dropped a diss track. Kanye West jumped in, teasing a Like That remix, and promising to help Kendrick take out Drake and Cole. The whole culture went nuclear. And somehow, Joe Budden had already predicted that too. Before Kendrick even said a word in response to First-Person Shooter, Joe Budden broke down exactly what would happen next. He said Kendrick would go for the one thing Drake could never defend. Those uncomfortable rumors that had followed him for years. And the scariest part? Joe said it years before it happened. In a clip that now feels downright supernatural, Joe was talking about how he could see right through Kendrick. And while making his point, he casually said the words that would later become the title of Kendrick's biggest hit in the beef. Like That. 3 years before it even existed. That's not commentary anymore. That's prophecy. Joe Budden didn't just predict the beef. He predicted the entire strategy. From the topics Kendrick would weaponize to the way the industry would react. Joe laid it all out before anyone realized it was coming. He literally said years ago, if Kendrick ever goes at Drake, he's gonna hit him where it hurts. That Millie Bobby Brown stuff. That's gonna be too much for him to handle. And what happened? Kendrick went there, and the internet lost its mind. Joe had already provided Kendrick with a playbook from his own war with Drake a decade earlier. In Joe's old diss tracks, he'd called out everything Drake's rivals would later use. The ghostwriting accusations, the OVO sweatshop jokes, party next door ghosting credit, and the surgery rumors. Even the lawsuits. Joe mentioned Drake's pattern of fighting through courts instead of bars, long before it happened. He even foresaw J. Cole bowing out of the feud completely. And guess what? That's exactly what went down. But maybe the craziest moment of all came when Joe dissected Drake's For All the Dogs album, months before any beef erupted. On his podcast, he criticized Drake for surrounding himself with people too young, saying, Drake needs to start hanging around women his own age. Fast forward, and that exact critique became the most devastating weapon Kendrick used against him. In Kendrick's biggest diss, he zeroed in on that theme. The very same thing Joe had already warned about. And it wasn't just coincidence. Even Drake himself played into it when he dropped Tailor-Made Freestyle, mocking Kendrick and rapping about how he liked young girls. He thought he was being clever, but all he did was echo the same words Joe had been saying for years. So when people call Joe Budden bitter or obsessed, they're missing the bigger picture. This man didn't just predict a beef, he mapped out the future of hip-hop conflict itself. Every domino that's fallen since, from Kendrick's verses to the industry reactions, was first tipped over by Joe Budden's microphone years before the world caught up. I heard it on the Budden podcast. It's gotta be true. That's what people say now. Half joking, half serious, because Joe Budden has turned being right too early into an art form. Drake knew these shots weren't random. They came from an opponent who had studied the game, the business, and the mentality of hip-hop like no one else. Joe Budden wasn't just a rapper turned podcaster. He was a blueprint architect, someone who could read the patterns before they even formed. Whether the year was 2015 or 2024, Joe's words carried a strange weight, the kind that didn't just echo, but manifested. From calling out the Drake-Kendrick collision years before it happened, to predicting how streaming deals would reshape artistry, to warning about the cost of chasing algorithmic success, Joe mapped it all out with uncanny precision. His ability to strip away the fan bias and look at the culture from the inside, like a strategist, not a spectator, is exactly why so many of his old rants have aged like prophecy. Joe wasn't talking as a fanboy or a critic. He was speaking like a man who'd lived through the contracts, seen the manipulation, and understood the machine better than anyone still trapped inside it. He turned pain into perspective, and perspective into prediction. And now, looking back, it's impossible to ignore how accurate he's been. Not just about Drake or Kendrick, but about the entire hip-hop ecosystem. The artists, the platforms, the labels, even the fans. Joe saw where it was all heading before the rest of us even realized we were being steered. So maybe the joke's on everyone who laughed at him. Maybe the angry retired rapper wasn't bitter. Maybe he was the only one awake. Let me know what you guys think. Was Joe Budden just ranting, or was he warning us? Drop your thoughts below, and until next time, keep your eyes open. Because in hip-hop, even prophecy sounds like podcast talk. Until it all comes true.